Okay, who can tell me what the difference is between a podcast and audio that you find on the internet? What's the difference between the two?
Is it more compressed?
Not necessarily. It could be. It could be. Because audio on the internet is nothing new. It's been around almost as long as the internet has. So there's a few pieces that set a podcast apart from regular audio. The first thing that sets it apart, the first thing to know about a podcast is when someone talks about creating a podcast, the podcast itself is like a television show. It's not one piece. So you have a podcast, which is the big show, and then what you actually record are episodes for that podcast. Just some terminology behind it. So if I have a podcast called Brian Mull's Podcast, inside of that podcast I'll have episode 1 is getting to know your iPod. Episode 2 is learning how to record. Episode 3, and all of these fall under the podcast. The podcast is the show itself. Okay? It's a show made up of episodes just like TV. Now the second thing that makes a podcast is the fact that it's subscribable. When you find just a song on the internet, if you can't subscribe to it and save it somewhere, have new content come into you on a regular basis, it's not really a podcast. It's a collection of audio files, and that's all it is. So let me show you here. If I go into, let me open up my iTunes, and right here, and ignore that explicit tag up at the top.
You're not.
I'm standing in front of it. And it's still dark. No.
Yes.
Okay, maybe it's just gotta wake up. Like the rest of us. Okay, so when you get into iTunes, what happens is you can go, and we'll talk about this a little bit more as we move on. You can subscribe to different podcasts that are out there in the world. Okay? So these are podcasts that I subscribe to, and they're based around different interests that I have. I like my Mac, so I subscribe to Mac Break Weekly. I'm into digital photography, so I have a couple photography ones. So I mean, if you're into knitting, you can find knitting podcasts, whatever, cooking, whatever. You can find podcasts about anything that you want, and I subscribe to them. Once I subscribe to them, I don't have to look for these anymore. These stay in my list. And now, anytime I start iTunes, it does an automatic check to see if there's new content that any of these podcasts have created. And if there is, it'll go ahead and download them for me. So for example, if I go to this This Week in Photography podcast, here's the podcast, This Week in Photography, and then these are all of the individual episodes listed under that podcast. Okay? So you can see some of them say Get next to them, which means I haven't downloaded them yet. Generally, if a new one comes in, it'll start downloading on its own. Sometimes if you shut down your network connection in between, it stops it, and that's why you get these gets in there. But it's automatic, so I don't have to go out. I can go to their website. They have a website where all of these are posted, and I could go to that website every day if I wanted to see if they have new content. But by making it subscribable through a podcast, I don't have to do that now. I subscribe to it once, and everything comes in. Okay?